The sun was dipping low behind the distant trees as Ethan pulled into the gravel driveway of his new home. It wasn't just any house, this was his escape. After years in the city, crowded apartments, and boardroom politics, he had finally bought his piece of peace. A slightly run-down country house on the edge of town, with open land and a heavy, rust-kissed front gate that reminded him of old Western films. He stepped out of the truck, a keyring in one hand, and wiped the dust off the metal gate's lock. It clicked open with a little resistance. Behind him, his rented trailer sat full of furniture, tools, and everything he owned, a fresh start. Finally, but across the quiet street, movement caught his eye. Through a white-trimmed window, someone was staring. The curtain dropped quickly, as if someone had been caught. Ethan shook his head and went back to unlocking the second chain wrapped around the gate center. Then came the voice. "What do you think you're doing?" He looked up. A woman was marching across the road. Late 50s, tall, stern face, arms swinging like she owned the pavement. Her eyes were locked on him. "I'm unlocking my gate," Ethan replied, calm but confused. "This isn't your house," she snapped. "I've lived here 20 years. I know the family who owns this place. They moved out a month ago." Ethan stepped aside so she could see the moving truck. "I bought it. Closed last Friday. I'm moving in today." She narrowed her eyes. "That's impossible. The Johnsons never mentioned selling. I bought it directly through a private sale," he said. "I have the deed in the cab." She ignored his explanation and reached for her phone. Ethan frowned. "You're not serious." "I'm calling the sheriff," she said. "You're trespassing. I don't know what scam this is, but you're not fooling me. No one just shows up and moves in like this." As she spoke, she backed away, loudly describing his clothes to the dispatcher. Ethan kept his hands visible and stayed still. He had nothing to hide, but he knew how fast these things could spiral. Within minutes, 2 squad cars rolled up. The lights spun but no sirens. Officers stepped out, hands at their belts, cautious. Karen waved them down, pointing at Ethan like he was a wild animal in her backyard. "He broke the lock," she said. "He's stealing furniture. He claimed he bought the house. He didn't." The officer approached Ethan. "Sir, can we see some ID?" Ethan nodded and handed it over. His driver's license matched the sale documents he produced from the truck's glove box. The deputy scanned the name, then the address. He made a quick call. While they waited, Karen stood by, arms folded, smiling like she had caught a burglar red-handed. Ethan kept his expression calm. He'd expected a few challenges moving here, but not this. The deputy returned. "Everything checks out. The sale went through last week." "Sir, you're good." Karen blinked. "But that can't be right. He's lying." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, he owns the property. You made a false report. We're letting you off with a warning." She gasped like she'd been slapped. "You're letting him move in." The officers exchanged looks. One of them lowered his voice. "Ma'am, we don't enforce HOA matters. This is a civil neighborhood. Please return to your residence." Karen hesitated, then turned without a word and stormed back across the street. Ethan watched her go, then turned to the officers. "Does this happen often?" The deputy exhaled. "Let's just say you'll want cameras." As the gate creaked open and the truck rolled forward, Ethan didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the last time Karen would come charging down that road. Not even close. This was only the opening move. The morning sun spilled across the porch as Ethan sipped his first coffee in the house. It was quiet, for now. The birds chirped in the distance, and the sound of a far-off lawnmower hummed like a warning that suburbia was already stirring. He leaned back in a chair he hadn't yet unpacked fully, taking in the view across his small front yard and gravel drive. Then he noticed something strange, a white envelope tucked awkwardly into his gate, just behind the post where no mail should go. It wasn't from the post office, no stamp, no address label, just his first name, written in bold, shaky letters. He walked over slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He opened the envelope. Inside was a typed letter, no logo, no contact info, just a single page of firm language. "Dear resident, it has come to our attention that your fence and gate structure do not comply with community visual standards. As per HOA guidelines, you are required to replace the front-facing barrier with approved fencing within 10 days to avoid penalties. Sincerely, Neighborhood Board Committee." Ethan stared at the page for a long moment. There was one problem. He wasn't part of the HOA. He stepped inside and pulled out the county zoning map he'd printed before buying the home. His property fell outside the boundaries by nearly a block. It was old ranch land, never annexed, never folded into the nearby subdivisions. The seller had even warned him about the HOA folks trying to rope his land into their rules. Even though legally, they had no claim. This letter confirmed that someone, likely Karen, was now trying to enforce rules that didn't apply. He scanned the language again. It read more like a threat than a request. But what stood out even more was the effort to make it look official, without anything verifiable on the page. Ethan didn't waste time. He called the county office, asked for confirmation, and got it within minutes. His property was freestanding. No HOA authority extended over his land. It was settled legally. Still, as he walked back out to the porch, Something gnawed at him. This wasn't about fences. This was about control. She had seen him as a stranger. Now, she saw him as a threat. Not because of who he was, but because he didn't answer to her version of order. And people like Karen didn't take kindly to people who didn't fall in line. Later that afternoon, Ethan heard rustling outside. He stepped out to find another neighbor, an older man in a polo shirt standing. Just beyond the gate, the man smiled awkwardly and held up a flyer. "Sorry to bother you," he said, "but we're handing out these reminders about the HOA architectural standards." Ethan took the flyer, glanced at it, then looked up. "Is this from Karen?" The man hesitated. "She asked the board to distribute them. I didn't know this place wasn't covered by the HOA. She said it was a mistake in the old maps. It wasn't." The man looked down, embarrassed. "Well, good to meet you, anyway. Welcome to the neighborhood." Ethan watched him leave, his polite smile never quite reaching his eyes. Back inside, Ethan pinned the flyer beside the fake letter. It was becoming clearer. Karen wasn't going to stop at confrontation. She was building a case, one false claim at a time, and if she couldn't control him legally, she'd try another route. Pressure, shame, neighborhood whispers. He didn't mind living off-grid, but now he realized the real isolation might come from being surrounded by people pretending to be friendly while quietly drawing the lines of battle. And Karen, she had just taken her second shot. 3 days passed without another direct encounter, but Ethan felt something had changed. The street no longer felt like a quiet corner of suburbia. Now it breathed with the rhythm of suspicion. Curtains shifted as he passed. Conversations hushed. When he neared his gate, he didn't need anyone to tell him Karen had been busy. The flyers had disappeared from mailboxes, but their impact lingered. The message had gotten out, twisted just enough to make Ethan sound like a rogue element, an outsider who didn't follow the rules, one who might lower property values. A problem. He went about his day quietly unloading the last boxers, changing locks, and sealing the crawl space beneath the house. But every step outside felt watched. The neighborhood, once silent and still, seemed to echo with hidden movement now. On the fourth morning, the first delivery was delayed. Then the second. By noon, he got a call from a landscaping contractor scheduled to clear debris from the backyard. "Sorry," the man said. "Your neighborhood told us that permits were pending, that it might be a violation if we stepped onto the property." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "My property doesn't need HOA permits." "I hear you, sir," the man replied, almost whispering. "But someone's trying real hard to make it seem like you're in the middle of a dispute." Ethan thanked him and hung up. A few taps on the keyboard pulled up county records. There were no flags, no permits needed for cleanup. Just as he suspected, by late afternoon, a neighbor from 2 houses down appeared at his gate. A woman in her 30s, holding a toddler in one arm and a reusable grocery bag in the other. She smiled, hesitant but genuine. "Hey, I just wanted to say welcome. I know things around here can be weird." Ethan tilted his head. "Weird how?" "Karen." She looked over her shoulder. "She talks like she runs the street. Some people go along with it. Others just stay quiet to avoid drama. But she doesn't speak for all of us." He nodded. "I appreciate that." She leaned in. "She told people you broke into the property, that you were squatting, said you forced your way into the house. The cops came, right?" "They did. They left when they realized I owned the place." The woman nodded knowingly. She left that part out. After she walked off, Ethan stood, still in the fading light. His hands were steady, but his mind was no longer in retreat. Karen's tactics weren't wild or impulsive anymore. They were planned, quiet, strategic. He respected that dash almost. Later that evening, a slow grinding noise echoed from the front of the property. Ethan slipped out the side door, moving along the fence line. In the shadows near the edge of the road, a man crouched near the gate, fiddling with something. Ethan stepped closer. The man froze. "You work for the HOA?" The man bolted before answering, just ran toward a white SUV, parked a few houses down, and drove off. Ethan stood under the glow of the street lamp and examined the gate post, 2 freshly installed screws, with a metal bracket still attached. Someone had tried to mount a small device, possibly a camera or a sensor. He removed the bracket, took it inside, and set it on the table next to the fake HOA letter and the flyer. 3 pieces now. 3 quiet moves. It wasn't just a war of words anymore. Someone had crossed the line, and he was done waiting. Ethan sat at the dining table the next morning, the metal bracket in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. He wasn't sure whether to be amused or alarmed. It hadn't been just a bracket. On closer inspection, it had wiring on the inside, enough to house a small motion sensor or possibly a GPS tag. Not something you pick up at the local hardware store. That meant someone had planned to monitor his movements, maybe log when he came and went. And that wasn't just nosy behavior, that was invasive. He decided it was time to change the rules of the game. After a quiet breakfast, he drove to the edge of town and visited an old friend who ran a small tech shop. An hour later, he returned with 3 black boxes, compact motion-triggered cameras with Wi-Fi capabilities and full-range night vision. Nothing fancy, just enough to see everything happening around his property. He installed one on the front gate, another overlooking the side fence where the bracket had been found. and a third on the back path where the tree line bordered another. Homie ran the feeds to a laptop and tested the system. Everything worked. The view was clear, the range sharp. That evening, he didn't sit inside. He pulled up a chair on the front porch. The same rusty gate stood where it always had. Now, with a silent observer mounted above it, at precisely 6:42 p.m., Karen emerged. She didn't speak. She walked across the road, paused just short of the driveway, and placed a flyer in the dirt, next to the mailbox. Then she looked up, her eyes catching the black dot mounted just above the gate. Her mouth twitched slightly. She turned and walked away, but slower than usual. Ethan waited until nightfall to retrieve the paper. It was a repeat of the old flyer, but now with an added line in bold. This property is being monitored by the HOA for compliance. That phrase stuck with him. It implied something official, but it was a lie, and a dangerous one. He printed a fresh notice of his own and mounted it to the inside of the gate. It read simply, "This property is private, not under HOA jurisdiction. All unauthorized activity will be reported." The next morning, the cameras showed nothing unusual, but that afternoon, the delivery truck arrived again, finally on schedule. The driver stepped down and handed over the receipt. "We almost skipped this stop again," he said. "Dispatch got a call saying this place had active legal disputes. Neighbor interference. Your name was flagged." Ethan took a breath. "Did the call say who reported it?" The driver shook his head. "Came in anonymously. But that's the second time someone's tried to block deliveries here." Ethan nodded and thanked him, then returned inside and pulled up the feed from 2 nights ago. He fast-forwarded through the timeline. At 2:17 a.m., a dark figure crossed the edge of the screen just beyond the gate's edge. There it was again. A second person, taller, hooded. They stopped at the gate, turned back toward the street, and whispered something. Ethan slowed the clip and enhanced the audio. 2 words. "She's watching." That night, Ethan stared out his window longer than usual. He didn't know who the second person was, but he now knew Karen wasn't alone. Whatever was going on, it wasn't just a woman guarding neighborhood rules. It was something coordinated. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was surveillance, and Ethan had just begun recording, too. Ethan stood in the dusty aisle of the county recorder's office, flipping through files with practiced patience. The walls hummed with quiet fans and old fluorescent lights. A few people typed softly at desks behind him, absorbed in real estate transfers and land permits. But Ethan wasn't there to buy or sell. He was there to dig. He had been pushed long enough. The video footage had confirmed one thing: Karen wasn't acting alone. Someone had been feeding her information, or possibly working alongside her in the shadows. And if that was true, then it wasn't just about ego or obsession. There was an intent behind it, a plan. He had questions, now real ones, and answers weren't going to arrive in polite conversations, so he started with the HOA's formation records. The neighborhood to the north had formally incorporated as a homeowners association 12 years earlier. Their map showed parcel coverage, election history, and governing guidelines. It was all properly notarized and filed until Ethan noticed something odd. Karen's name didn't appear on any of the official documents. Not once. No signature as board president, no role as treasurer, no official election result. He flipped backward through older minutes. The last 3 board presidents had all resigned within 5 years, citing personal issues or relocation. Karen's name showed up only once in those entries as the acting chair during a vacancy, but nowhere was there a record of her being voted in. Ethan asked the woman at the front desk if the HOA had submitted any recent leadership updates. She checked the system. Nope, nothing in the last 18 months. If someone's claiming authority right now, they're probably just running things unofficially. He thanked her and walked out into the sunlight, a quiet sense of confirmation settling in his chest. Karen had no legal standing. She'd been riding on title alone, convincing the neighborhood she was still in charge, when in reality, the seat had gone cold over a year ago. That evening, Ethan printed copies of the last verified board filings. He laid them on his dining table beside the letter, the flyer, and the metal bracket. The pieces had shifted into place. Karen's influence wasn't official. It was performative, and now Ethan knew how to shake it. He walked out with a new kind of calm, strolling along the front yard, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. A few neighbors watered lawns or pulled in garbage bins. They glanced at him. Some nodded, others didn't, but the air felt different. Ethan passed by the home. 2 doors down, an older man was closing his garage. They made eye contact. "You ever been to a board meeting?" Ethan asked casually. The man chuckled under his breath. "Not since Karen started showing up." "Funny," Ethan said, "because the county records don't show she was ever voted in." The man's expression shifted. Ethan didn't wait for a reply. He just kept walking. Back home, he typed up a message. Nothing loud, nothing angry. Just a simple invitation posted to the neighborhood group chat. Open HOA status meeting this weekend. Reviewing board roles and jurisdiction. Public records available. He didn't mention Karen. He didn't need to. The moment people started asking questions, the illusion would begin to crack. And cracks, if left alone, eventually split wide open. That night, Ethan sat back and watched the gate camera feed as the porch light flickered on. No figures, no movement, just quiet wind and distant dogs barking. But somewhere across the street, Karen's curtain twitched. She'd seen the message, and soon, the neighborhood would see the truth. The meeting wasn't official, and Ethan liked it that way. He chose the community park, not the HOA clubhouse Karen usually occupied. A picnic table near the fountain, open to anyone, with folding chairs brought by whoever felt curious enough to attend. By 10 minutes past noon, nearly 24 people had gathered. Some came in pairs, quiet and unsure. Others wore that suburban neutrality, arms folded, faces unreadable. Ethan stood by with a calm posture and a manila folder under his arm. He had nothing to prove. All he had to do was hold up the mirror. Karen arrived late. She walked in like she owned the air. Sunglasses on, a clipboard tucked tight under her arm. She glanced around at the gathering with mild irritation, as if she'd stumbled into a block. Party that hadn't asked her permission. I wasn't informed of this meeting, she said to no one in particular. Ethan didn't respond right away. He let the quiet settle. A few people shifted awkwardly. Then he stepped forward and opened his folder. No one needed permission, he said. This isn't an HOA board meeting. It's a neighborhood gathering to talk about who's really been representing who. Karen's lips pressed together. Ethan laid out 3 documents. A property map, the county HOA registration summary, and the most recent officer filing from over a year ago. He spoke in short, measured sentences. No blame, just facts. The HOA hasn't filed new board members since the last president resigned. According to public records, there hasn't been a legally recognized board since then, which means he paused, holding up the page. There's been no authority to enforce anything for over a year. The air thickened. A couple in the back, murmured a teenager with a hoodie, leaned closer toward his dad. Karen scoffed. That's not how it works. I stepped in when no one else would. Someone had to maintain standards. But you weren't elected, Ethan said plainly. And the HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over non-member properties, which includes mine. A man near the front cleared his throat. So, if no board exists, why have we been paying dues? Karen's neck stiffened slightly. Those funds go toward maintenance, landscaping, the pool, and who's been handling that? The man pressed. Who signed the vendor contracts? Karen hesitated. Ethan stepped back, letting the questions roll on their own. Did you collect dues legally? Where's the financial record? Did the vendors even get paid? She tried to hold her composure. I've kept everything running. I've held this community together while most of you sat back and did nothing. There it was. That shift, the edge in her voice. Neighbors exchanged glances. Some looked down, others looked directly at her. Ethan didn't interrupt. He didn't have to. The more she spoke, the more the structure she built began to creak. One of the younger neighbors raised a hand. Maybe it's time we have an actual vote. Start from scratch. Do things right. Ethan nodded. That's all I wanted. Transparency. Choice. Karen stared at him. The look wasn't rage. It was deeper recognition. She knew the meeting wasn't the fight. It was the end of her grip. Didn't need permission to question anymore. They'd seen the strings, and now they wanted scissors. As the crowd began to disperse, talking among themselves, Ethan packed up his folder. A few neighbors came over and quietly thanked him. Others just nodded. But one thing was clear. He was no longer an outsider. And Karen, she stood alone beside the fountain, tapping her clipboard like it could still write rules. She didn't know it yet, but the next letter she received wouldn't be one she'd send. Karen sat behind the steering wheel of her aging sedan, fingers tapping nervously on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. The meeting had rattled her more than she expected. The faces of neighbors who once nodded respectfully now looked at her with doubt, even quiet defiance. Her grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and she knew it. She needed one last move, one that would reassert control and remind everyone why she was the one calling the shots. That night, she drafted a letter not to the neighbors, but to the city council. Complaints about unauthorized property modifications, illegal installations, and potential safety hazards were carefully worded to sound official. She mentioned Ethan's cameras, his unapproved fence repairs, and even an anonymous tip about suspicious activities. On the property, she signed it as a concerned resident to keep her involvement indirect. With a final glance at the gate camera, she dropped the letter in the mail slot and drove away, feeling a fleeting sense of satisfaction. But Ethan was already one step ahead. That same evening, while reviewing camera footage, he noticed Karen sneaking around the gate once more. The flash of a small envelope in her hand was unmistakable. He had set the cameras to notify him the moment anyone lingered near the gate at night. He saved the clip and prepared a discreet message to his lawyer, a trusted ally, who had been quietly watching the situation develop. By morning, the city council's office called Ethan. The letter was flagged as an official complaint, but the council wanted evidence before launching any investigation. Ethan sent over footage showing Karen entering his property without permission, tampering with the gates, wiring bracket, and delivering the suspicious letter. He included copies of the HOA's lack of official status and his property's zoning documents. Within days, the city council responded. Karen was ordered to cease all harassment, including unauthorized property visits and false complaints. Any further actions would lead to fines and legal consequences, but that wasn't the end. Word had spread through the neighborhood. Several board members who had stayed silent began distancing themselves from Karen. The same neighbors who had once avoided Ethan now approached him with quiet thanks and tentative apologies. But one afternoon a note was slipped under his door. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. Keep fighting. We're behind you. Meanwhile, Karen found herself increasingly isolated. Calls to local businesses for HOA landscaping were met with refusals. Many companies had received direct orders. To avoid dealings with her, her frustration boiled over in a private phone call. Caught on one of Ethan's outdoor microphones, a precaution installed after a suspicious late-night conversation. You think you've won? She hissed into the receiver. I'm not done, not yet. Ethan smiled quietly to himself. The war had entered its final phase, but this time, he held the advantage. Months had passed since the city council's ruling. The tension that once hung thick in the air had begun to lift, but the neighborhood remained a quiet powder keg. Ethan had settled into his home with a newfound confidence, his cameras now a silent shield against any future trouble. His legal team continued to monitor the situation, and the HOA board, long shadowed by Karen's influence, was preparing to reorganize with transparent elections. One crisp morning, Ethan stood on his porch, watching a moving truck pull into the driveway 2 houses down. A couple stepped out, a man and woman, smiling, holding hands as they surveyed their new home. The woman waved at Ethan. He returned the gesture. There was something familiar about them, something he couldn't quite place. Later, Ethan learned from a neighbor that the couple was related to his lawyer, the one who had quietly supported him. Throughout the battle, they had moved here, not just as neighbors, but as allies. That as the days passed, Ethan noticed something unexpected. The new couple was renovating their property, replacing their old fence with one that mirrored Ethan's sturdy, ranch-style gate, complete with polished ironwork and a modern security system. The gesture felt like a silent declaration. This neighborhood was no longer ruled by shadows. One afternoon, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the street. Karen, she parked her car across from Ethan's home, stepping out with a look that was equal parts defiance and resignation. Their eyes met across the road. No words were spoken. Instead, Ethan watched as Karen turned and walked away. Casting one last glance over her shoulder, the gate swung shut behind her, solid and secure. It was a quiet victory. The neighborhood was no longer a battleground, but a community, one where respect was earned, not forced. Ethan's phone buzzed, a message from the new neighbors. Welcome to the block. Let's build something better. And with that, the chapter closed.